convincing than one, except when they remember a suspect's feature. This article was written by Crystal R. Slane and Chad S. Dodson and is reviewed by me, Joy Dudek. Summary. Slane and Dodson were interested in determining when two eyewitnesses would be more persuasive than one. The study consists of 2 experiments testing when 2 eyewitnesses are more persuasive than one through lineup identifications and eyewitness statements. Experiment 1. So there were 1,234 participants that originally took part in this study using Turk Prime, which is an extension of Amazon Mechanical Turk. Participants were excluded if they didn't pass an attention check given with the instructions or if they completed the task multiple times, which was indicated through duplicate IP addresses. After excluding participants, it brought it down to 741 participants that were involved in this study. These participants were shown a lineup of 6 faces, as seen in Figure 1. One of the faces was randomly chosen to be the eyewitness choice, as highlighted by the red box. These participants were shown confidence statements from either 1 or 2 eyewitnesses. This created 9 between subjects conditions through the combination of either a single or a pair of eyewitness statements. And these eyewitness statements included either confidence statements only, so I'm sure it was him, a featural justification only, so I'm sure it was him because I remember his eyebrows, or a recognition statement only, so I'm sure it was him because I remember him, or some combination of these. It's important to note that the featural justification and the recognition justification both included identical confidence statements, so as I said, I'm sure it was him because, or I'm positive it was him because. After this, the participants were then told to estimate the guilt of the suspect after reading the eyewitness statements. This was based on a 6-point Likert scale, starting at 50%, so equally likely to be guilty or innocent, to 100%, where they were certain that the suspect was guilty. The results of this study, as shown in Figure 2, for the single eyewitness condition, showed that participants were less likely to perceive a suspect as guilty when eyewitnesses provided a featural justification. Also, it is important to note that there was no significant difference between the recognition justification and the featural nor the confidence condition. However, when you get into the 2 eyewitness condition, participants were also less likely to perceive suspects as guilty when both eyewitnesses provided featural justifications. And this is in comparison to eyewitnesses who provided confidence-only justifications. So in Experiment 2, Slane and Dodson were interested in determining if there were limitations to this featural justification effect. The featural justification effect is how they referred to the phenomenon that 2 eyewitnesses were still seen as less accurate or persuasive when they used a featural justification. So Slane and Dodson predicted that when 2 eyewitnesses referred to the same feature, that the participants would assume that said feature is more memorable than what they personally thought and rate the suspect as more guilty, rather than if the 2 eyewitnesses had referred to different features. In this study, they had 310 participants from Turk Prime. They used the same exclusion techniques in Experiment 2 that they did in Experiment 1. All participants in this study saw confidence statements from 2 eyewitnesses rather than 1 or 2. And there were 3 conditions. There was the confidence statement condition, where both statements were confidence only. The featural different condition, where both statements referred to different features, and the featural same condition, where both statements referred to the same feature. It's also important to note that the researchers wanted to increase ecological validity, and so in order to do that, they included a reference to a transcript of an interview between an officer and an eyewitness, and they redacted any identifying information to make it seem more realistic, even though the transcript was completely made up. Additionally, they wanted to increase the power, so participants were made to judge to make guilt judgments about 2 different lineups instead of just the one from experiment 1. These 2 lineups were created by the experimenters using images from the PUT database, the Radboud face database, and the SC face database, and both were rated as fair, meaning that no face in the lineup stood out more than any other face in the lineup. After that, participants were instructed to rate the guilt of the suspect on the same 6-point Likert scale from experiment 1. So the results of experiment 2 replicated the results of experiment 1 in that the participants were still more likely to view a suspect as guilty when the eyewitnesses provided confidence-only statements rather than the eyewitnesses provided featural justifications. However, suspects were more likely to be perceived as guilty when both eyewitnesses described the same feature in a featural justification rather than when they described different features. However, suspects were still more likely to be viewed as guilty in the condition-only condition. So, critique of this research. The results of this research are important because it shows that jurors have a bias towards their own opinions of a suspect's features rather than evaluating the guilt off of an eyewitness's statement, which includes, when evaluating the guilt off of an eyewitness statement, which includes a featural justification for confidence. So, when the eyewitness says that they're confident that the suspect is the guy who committed the crime, based on remembering his eyebrows, if the juror doesn't feel that his eyebrows are very memorable, they're more likely to believe that the eyewitness statement is not accurate. And this is what the researchers referred to as a social metacognitive error. I didn't find any problems with the theory that the researchers used, nor did they list any limitations, although this is coming from an individual who does not have experience in eyewitness identification. Some possible real-world implications. So we know that the eyewitnesses who justify their confidence in their identification based on remembering a specific feature of the suspect are not more likely to be incorrect about their identification than an eyewitness who did not justify their identification by remembering a feature. Despite that, jurors are still less likely to convict if there's a featural justification from 2 eyewitnesses, especially if they describe different features. So I'm wondering if perhaps we could use this information to develop some sort of set of instructions for jurors, or some sort of reminder to be aware that the featural justification isn't more likely to be incorrect, and that just because they don't feel that it's very memorable does not mean that someone who is a victim of a crime doesn't remember these features, especially if more than one eyewitness remembers the same feature. That's it. That's the end.